السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد الأمين وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه الطيبين والتابعين لهم بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين فرجا ومسلمين. اللهم انصر إخوانا في غزة وفلسطين واليمن ولبنان والسودان في كل مكان يا أكرم الأكرمين. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ونعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع. اللهم نور قلوبنا، اللهم تحلل قلوبنا من الرياء والنفاق. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وسلم. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. So we are beginning this session. This is the first session that we are having in a series going over, inshallah, Sunnah compliant activism. And when we are speaking of the Sunnah, we're speaking of a Sunnah Nabawiyah, both of the aspects of al-Dhahiriyah wal-Batiniyah, meaning the outward aspects and also the inward states in regards to this endeavor of activism. And last year at this time, we did a similar series of sessions through Muslim Coalition at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So we were invited this year with Allah's permission to go over some of this information. I think that is especially timely for us to have these reminders, to refresh ourselves and even maybe get some new information, given the particular social political environment of what's going on globally amongst Muslims, and also this year being an election year. And not only because it's an election year, but depending on certain social political elements, what is going to begin to transpire after the election, depending on who wins and how we as a community will definitely need to address certain issues and organize on a national level, as well as even on a local level at our institutions and schools that seemingly our free speech rights are being jeopardized. So with that, the reason, and a lot of it's going to be based upon this book that I wrote a few years ago, Towards Sacred Activism, which the second edition of this book should be out within about a month, second edition, which is a little bit longer. And there's some additions as well as some more footnotes in the upcoming edition that one of our teachers, Imam Zayd Shakir, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, assisted with the project in writing the foreword to the book. The reason of writing the book is we began to see a growing trend amongst Muslims involving activism and community organizing, and basically seeing two different groups, and one segment growing much quicker than another segment. The latter, which I mentioned, is that Muslims who are, I don't want to use the word practicing Muslims, that's not a good word, but Muslims who are more, we could say, reverent of the tradition of Islam. And by the tradition, I mean the traditional ways of transmission. Like they actually had some traditional tarbiyah, like upbringing, sat with a sheikh and studied something about Aqidah, or memorizing Quran, learning like some basic like adab that a Muslim should have. So there's one group of Muslims who looks at their objectives as well as the means within the framework of the tradition. Then another group of Muslims who are very passionate and growing in numbers, who are concerned about a number of issues, and in which the ends or noble, but necessarily the starting place of what is determining where they're going is not like muwafiq. It's not in alignment per se with the Quran and Sunnah, starting with its intention. And then number two, the means. The means, right? So within this is why the book was authored, was basically looking at the facts on the ground and trying to give a correction. So we're talking about prophetic activism or sacred activism. I think it's important, like, what distinguishes a Muslim involved in activism that may be a secular base versus a Muslim who is involved in prophetic or sacred activism? What is the difference? Because there is a difference. So we see from our tradition that the word sacred is mentioned in the hadith of our Prophet, alayhi afdalu salatu wasalam. And the word in Arabic that's used is harma. Harma means sacredness. So for instance, there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, el mu'minu a'zamu harmatan min al-Ka'bah. And there's another riwayah in which the Prophet alayhi salam literally points at the Kaaba. The meaning of the hadith is a believer in his or her importance and majesty is more sacred than the Kaaba. And this is the word harma, right? That there's more harma to one believer than that particular edifice that we face 5 times a day, right? If Muslims even pondered this, our adab would be better with each other. We would treat each other with much more respect, because by Allah, if these people who are doing what they were doing, if we in some parts of the Muslim world, if they announced that they were going to get an army to go to destroy the Kaaba, I know for a fact there'd be many people, including some college students, to say, I'm dropping out of school and I'm going to go and try to get to Saudi Arabia any way I can to defend the Kaaba. Isn't that right? We're supposed to be more concerned about the individual mu'min, no matter where they're at in the world, from the east to the west, than that building and a piece of land, even though that's the most sacred masjid. Okay, so harma. So when we think of harma, the most sacred masjid is al-Masjid al-Haram. Al-Masjid al-Haram is the most sacred masjid. And that area where the masjid at is called al-Haram. So harma, al-Haram, and al-Haram all are connected linguistically in Arabic. The most sacred masjid, and the Haram is translated as sacred precincts. So in the Haram, there's supposed to be a heightened awareness about what one should do and what one should not do in the sacred precincts. Who made al-Masjid al-Haram sacred in the Haram? Who set that sacredness to that? Who set the precincts? Anyone tell me? Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, jazakallahu khairan, right? It wasn't up for democracy. It wasn't up for majority vote. It was the creator of the heavens and the earth himself who established that harma of the haram, right? Not public opinion polls. So if activism is sacred, then it is done for the sake of Allah, number one. And not only is it done lillah, it's also fillah billah. It is done for the sake of Allah, and it is then conforming with that which is pleasurable to Allah, and by means that are within the Sharia given to Al-Habib al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's what makes activism prophetic or sacred. What a Muslim who is not doing their activism for the sake or the pleasure of Allah, or learning that which is pleasurable to Allah and staying away from what is displeasurable to Allah, and not using means that are muwafaqa, conform with the sunnah, that's not sacred activism. That's just a Muslim that's involved in some sort of activism. And the results of that activism could actually cause more harm to Muslims. And in fact, the activist who is doing activism outside of these three could actually be accumulating sins in the name of some sort of social justice cause. It is very possible that a Muslim could accumulate sins on behalf of advocating for Gaza. It's possible. It's very possible, because we don't believe in the ends justifying the means. And what is the activism for? Is the activism for the sake of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, or is the sake for secular nationalism? What is that activism really about? And we have to interrogate this in all the things that we do. We have to interrogate, why are we doing what we are doing? And if we're doing it for Allah, we can't be haphazard. And this is the tafsir that the scholars have given of the ayah, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create jinn nor men except they worship me alone. Right? And ibadah means more than just making salah and paying zakah and fasting Ramadan and making hajj. In this aspect, liya'budun means our entire life. Kul inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. Say, my prayer, my sacrifice, my life, and my death all belong to Allah. What else is there? My prayer, my sacrifice, my entire life, and even my death, they all belong to God. There's nothing else. That's the entire affair of our lives in this dunya. That's everything, right? That's everything. So that's the difference between Muslims who are just involved in activism and activism that is prophetic or seeking to be sacred activism. That's the difference. Now, inshallah, if some of you are not already, inshallah, I hope that all of you in some fashion or form become tulabul ilm, that you become students of knowledge. And when I'm saying students of knowledge, when I say ilm, I'm talking about of the tradition of the sacred sciences. What you're doing for your dunya here at Wayne State, may Allah bless you with it. May Allah bless you. May Allah make you all successful and rich in your dunyawi affairs, as long as you are earning money that's halal, and as long as you are contributing to the sake of Islam. May Allah make you all millionaires. Nothing wrong with having money, as long as it's earned in a halal way, and you're paying your zakat and you're giving sadaqah fi sabilillah, alhamdulillah, no problem. When we study this tradition, especially usul, like usul fiqh, like your needy brother study, for instance, right? Every time you read a concept for fiqh, before discussing it, and also usul deen, that there are terms that are defined. So the scholar in the text and the teacher will go over this and define the terms, so that when you're talking about the operation or how to implement it, you're working with the same definition, right? So it's a lughawi definition and a shari definition, right? There's a linguistic definition, and we can say an operational definition, right? Or ilmi and amali. Now, we'll start off with the term justice, right? Our scholars have defined for us what is justice. And in the language of the Quran, in our books of Sharia, the most commonly used term is al-adala. Isn't that an Urdu word too, adala or adalat? Al-adala is also related to the word adl. In al-qist is normally used as a synonym of al-adl. Al-adl. Al-adl, besides justice, what also is al-adl? Can you tell me? Whose name does this belong to? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adl. Is al-adl. And scholars, like for instance, al-Raghib al-Asbahani, he was a Shafi'i scholar from Persia. You know, at one time, actually for the majority of Muslim history, Iran was majority madhab Shafi'i. It's only in a few hundred years recently that it become another madhab majority. Iran was, Imam Ghazali was from Iran, from Tus. I've been there before. It's Al-Raghib Isfahani, Al-Hakam al-Nisaburi. Actually, the hadith scholars of As-Sihah al-Sitta, none of them were Arabs. They were Persians. Al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Ibn Majah, Abu Dawood, At-Tirmidhi, none of them were Arabs. They are our greatest scholars in hadith. Al-Raghib Isfahani mentioned this al-adl is translated as justice. But when something is adl, it is balanced and it is in its proper place. So linguistically speaking, the opposite of al-adl is al-dhulm, which is injustice, but literally carries the meaning taking something outside of its proper place. So Allah, when we think of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala as al-adl, He is the one who put everything, He is the one who put everything in their proper places as He intended them to function in. Allah is the one who created this universe, and He placed everything in its proper places as He intended them to function in. Right? So, when human beings are operating in society and they are operating within the confines or under the guardrails of granting people their human rights or their natural rights that Allah intended them to have, then this is relative justice, societal justice, on the level of al-ijtima'iyya, societal justice. However, if people take things outside of their proper places that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala intended them to function in, this is dhulm. If people take things outside of their proper places, this is dhulm or wrongdoing. And Allah, who Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, La yuhibbu dhalimin. Allah does not love those people who do open wrong or injustice, meaning taking things outside of their proper place due to people. The first form of dhulm is ash-shirk billah. Allah describes this committing shirk is dhulmun azim. It's the greatest, it's like the most, it's the worst oppression, right? To ascribe partners to Allah, this is the worst, taking things outside their proper place, because Allah is al-ahad, right? He is one and unique. And of the subtleties of Him being al-ahad is that if you have wahid, like you say, kul huwa Allahu ahad. If you say wahid, you can have an ithnain. If you can have an ithnain, you can have a thalatha. Al-ahad. He is the one and only who is unique and without any possibility of any addition or subtraction. This is Allah who Azza wa Jal. So when people take things outside their proper places, so this is important to think about when we look at this under the frame of the Sharia, sacred law. Some people can say that something is a justice issue, which in fact is taking things outside of its proper place. So someone can say something is injustice, But in fact, what they're demanding is not inherently justice. You understand what I'm saying? And we'll get to that a little bit more when I talk about uh, the people with many huruf. The people of letters. We'll get to that later on. So a group of people could advocate for something and say, oh, this is a justice issue. Oh, by you not allowing me to do this or that, that's an injustice. When in fact, that's not inherently unjust to be against it or not to grant that accommodation. Likewise, something can be made legal and be said that it's a right, but in fact, it's not a God-given human right. So keep this in mind that when we're talking about in society, especially American society, I want you to memorize this phrase: legality does not equal morality. Legality does not equal morality. And illegality does not automatically mean immorality. So legality does not equal morality, and illegality doesn't necessarily equal immorality. Likewise, when we're talking about justice, there's another name of Allah Azza wa Jal that has importance to this topic, and he is Al-Haq. He is Al-Haq. Normally it's translated as he is the truth, or he is the reality. Also, Allah Azza wa Jal is the extender of, that I mentioned before, hukuk al-insan, because hukuk is plural of haq. Like each and every person, you can have a haq. Hukuk in Arabic is plural of haq. Hukuk al-insan means human rights. So for instance, even the founders of this country at least articulated this when they launched their thawra, or their intifada, against the British. That's what it was. It was an intifada. I had to memorize this when I was in school in Virginia, and they're really big on this history in Virginia because that was the first colony. That's where this intifada was, this document was written, the Declaration of Independence, right? We had to memorize this in school. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So even the founders of this country, they wrote down in a document that these inalienable rights did not come from a king, did not come from a state, did not come from a president, did not come from a general. These rights came from who? Al-Khaliq subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, right? And this is where real rights come from. And this is how we recognize whether something truly is justice or injustice at the first level. At the first level. Hence, our great American Muslim martyr, Malcolm X, rahimahullah ta'ala, he made a distinction, and this plays into our activism. Keep this in mind what we're talking about. He made a distinction very simply. You don't need to study law to understand this, between civil rights and human rights. So what he said was, the struggle of African Americans was not a civil rights struggle, it was a human rights struggle. He actually connected this to Palestine. You know, Malcolm X actually spent time in Gaza. Civil rights and human rights are different. Civil rights are given by a nation state, and only full civil rights are given to citizens of that nation state. Then there are partial rights given to people who are just there, traveling as tourists or on a visa. Then those who get permanent residency but not citizens get some elevated civil rights over those who are just traveling here as tourists per se. So for instance, in America, a non-citizen cannot legally purchase nor own a firearm. There's only a full civil right for a citizen who has no felonies on their record. Someone who's here visiting America or comes here as an immigrant, documented or undocumented, cannot vote legally in no state. This is one of the lies of that 45's campaign has put out, that there are people coming across the border and they're going to like vote in the elections. And this is a lie. This is not legal anywhere. Why? Because they don't have full civil rights, because they're not citizens, right? Human rights transcend space and time. Human rights are natural rights that transcends borders. These are human rights. But who gave these rights? Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal gave these rights. So again, there are some people trying to redefine human rights, and we can't play into their definitions and use their terminology, right? Because they're trying to make something a human right that's not. And a civil right may not be, again, a human right. A civil right may not even be a God-given human right. Likewise, a human right that's internationally recognized may not be considered a civil right for citizens. And our definition of human rights would come from the Sharia, not the UN Declaration of Human Rights. That institution was just started, I think, like around the year that my father was born, or a year or two before I was born. Like that's a new institution. It was started right after World War II, around the same time when that criminal regime was started, right around that same time. Right. But these human rights go long before so-called Magna Carta, and when Western people came up with some sort of human rights declaration or the United Nations, we had a concept and an idea of human rights articulated by Al-Habib al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. All right, so we should be clear about our definitions, because our definitions of how we operate and how we look at something as being a justice issue or not a justice issue can be important. Now, that doesn't mean that we only look at Islamic law for what is justice and forget about secular law. That's not true. That's not true at all. We as Muslims living in America, we have what's called a social contract. As being citizens or legal residents of this land, we have agreed to be under the social contract. If we live here as citizens, we are de facto part of the social contract. If someone immigrates here and they swear an oath, they literally have to take a citizenship test, and they sign a piece of paper and they swear an oath to obey the constitutions and the laws of the United States of America. This is an ahd, right? This is an agreement, and that we'll be held to our agreement on the day of judgment. We'll be held to it. So fulfill your covenants, and surely your covenants, your agreements that you swear upon, you will be held responsible for on the day of judgment. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentions this in the Quran. Or alfa bil uqud, you fulfill your contracts. You can't say, I'm in the land of kuffar, so I can just break these contracts. I can just, I can do business. I can abide by the laws with the Muslims, and then I can, oh, that's a kafir, so I don't need to, respect my agreements, respect their rights. That's un-Islamic. Unfortunately, I grew up with some people like that who actually had that understanding. So a secular law or a civil right can also be an issue of justice that we have public interest about as Muslims. I'll give you an easy example. Speed limits. Can anyone pick up Al-Muwatta by Imam Malik or Kitab al-Athar by Abu Yusuf or Sheikh Muhammad al-Shaybani, who were students of Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, and find anything about speed limits according to the Sharia? Did our mother Aisha radiallahu anha have a speed limit for her camel? May Allah be well pleased with our mother Aisha, all of our mothers, all the mothers are pleased. May Allah be pleased with them. We love them all. We're supposed to love them all. No, you're not going to find anything about that in the book of like Sharia, like Al-Ittisam by Shatibi, the Maqasa Sharia, or Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa, and Al-Risala of Imam Shafi'i, or Suyuti. You won't find anything about speed limits. That's something that's secular in nature, right? Now, we can't, but that relates to a justice issue. Speed limits, that actually is a justice issue. An injustice can happen for not having speed limits in certain areas, like a residential area, isn't that right? Why do we say that? Our scholars say that generally saying we have what's called 5 principles of the sacred law, even though speed limits are secular. But there's actually sacred interests in preserving secular laws or enforcing secular laws. For instance, let's say in a residential neighborhood, the speed limits are always 25 miles per hour. You have somebody, like unfortunately what happens in Dearborn, because people like to speed in Dearborn. And there's always people getting killed speeding through Dearborn. Let's say someone's going 55 miles an hour, speeding down the street in a 25-mile speed limit. What could happen? A kid comes out into the street, gets hit, and gets injured or killed. Of the first 2 principles of the sacred law is what? Hizbul nafs, preservation of life. Isn't that right? Preservation of life. La taqtul nafs allati harrama Allahu illa bil haqq. And don't kill anyone unjust. This is a command in the Quran. Isn't that right? So, you killing a soul unjustly is what? That's zulm, that's injustice. Okay, let's say you don't kill anyone. Let's say someone runs into someone's car and does property damage to their car, like how some Muslim just did to my car a couple of days ago and dented my new car. SubhanAllah, Muslim did that. And drove off. I don't even know who did it, but I know it was at a Muslim place, at a masjid. I know 99% it was a Muslim. I know how we do. We're the worst when it comes to operating in parking lots, and we break the law of parking. We break the law of parking. We'll break the law in the name of making Salat al-Jum'ah. And we think that Salah is maqbool, it's a qabul, it's accepted. And we break the law going to pray Salat al-Jum'ah. Lack of understanding. So you do property damage. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam said in his farewell sermon, Inna dima'akum wa amwalakum wa a'radakum haramun alaykum. Hadith sahih. Surely your blood, your property, and your honor are sacred upon you. They're sacred. So this secular law, even though there's nothing clear in the Sharia about speed limits, these speed limits serve a practical purpose of placing a barrier in front of injustice. And the injustice could take place whether the niyyah is there or not. Now, the niyyah is the first principle, and we'll get to that a little more in the next session, because the scholars, when we study al-Qawaid al-Kulliyat al-Fiqhiyya, when we study Islamic law, the first principle. I'm not going to use the word in Arabic. There's an organization that took that word, that's a good word, and misused it. It's the singular of qawaid. The Arabs here know the word I'm talking about. La thawaba illa binniya. Or la thawaba wa iqaba illa binniya. There's ijma' upon this from the scholars. There is no reward, nor any reward in this life, nor positive effects or reward in the next life, except with niyyah. We are judged firstly by the niyyah, but it doesn't stop there. Like, for instance, even in secular law, there's a difference between voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. But whether someone were to run me over intentionally or unintentionally, I'm still what? Mayyit. I'm still dead. There was still dhulm done, whether the niyyah was to kill me or not. It's still injustice, right? So keep this in mind. We're talking, and again, I'm talking about things on the macro level. As we go further in these sessions, we will then talk about some things on specifics, but we have to deal with level setting and things on the macro level before we get to individual issues. And we'll get to these a little later on as we progress in talking about the differences between coalitions versus alliances, because this word allyship is misused so much amongst Muslims. Many of us found out who these so-called allies we thought we had. We found out on October 7th, especially like your parent generation. These people we thought were our allies and friends, we found out real quick. We found out who many things were exposed. Alhamdulillah, it's good to know the truth instead of being deceived, right? And we'll go over these things more as we continue with the next sessions. I think I will stop there because I said I was going to talk for about 45 minutes before any Q&A on this subject. It's 5:45. Are there any questions for the Faqih in relationship to the introduction, which I truncated, or this chapter from Towards Sacred Activism on what is justice? Yeah. Go ahead, Ali.
I know you spoke about like secular laws.
Yeah.
Are certain secular laws that Islam would consider unjust? Do we still have to follow those laws?
Very good question. You hear that question, sisters? About secular laws. Are there certain secular laws that we would think would be unjust? What we have to follow? So let's do a few clarifications. It's a very good question. First of all, any law that would make any of our wajibat, mean those things that are essential in the deen, to practice and to follow, we do not have to Islamically obey that if any of our wajibat were made illegal. Islamically speaking, now, of course, that would mean practicing civil disobedience. You could get locked up. If it became too oppressive to practice any of the wajibat to the point that we were being mass rounded up, or even killed, hijrah would then become wajib. This took place with the Muhajirin. There were two migrations to Habasha, to the land of now what we know as Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somaliland. Then the Prophet with Abu Bakr Siddiq, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, wa radiyallahu anhu, to Medina, or even I'll give you an example. When the Crusaders came to Jerusalem in the first Crusades, 70,000 people were massacred in 5-week time period. 70,000 in 5 weeks with no smart bombs, right? They ended up fleeing. They left. A number of them end up going to Syria, but a number of them went to Iraq, Baghdad in particular. And we know of their ancestors like Sheikh Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi and Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi. These are like two great like scholars of the Hanabila, method Hanbali. Because when someone has a name, when someone knows al-Maqdisi, that means they're from Jerusalem, al-Maqdisi. They're from Jerusalem. They fled, they left. And Jerusalem was under occupation in al-Masjid al-Aqsa for 98 years before Muslims took it back. When Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was the general. They made hijrah. Now, that's the most extreme, when you're being slaughtered to the point that you have no way of defending yourselves, like zero way. Okay, so that's one. If there are some laws that are passed, for instance, I've debated and discussed with some of my teachers, is it actually wajib for Muslims to even live in France anymore? Right? They've had masajid closed down. They tried to push imams to do certain marriages that are against the Sharia, and they've banned hijab for Muslim women to work in the government and to even go to school. And now they made a law because all the Muslims were pulling their children out of school for homeschooling them. This past year, they made homeschooling illegal. You have to send your children to school, what? To be indoctrinated into French liberalism. So it's questionable if it's even jaiz for Muslims to live in France. Maybe they should go back to Senegal and Mali and El Jazair and Maghreb, because they can't. Allah said he made this earth spacious. We don't have an excuse with Allah on the day of judgment. So, we could not practice our religion because we live in this land. He's going to say, wasn't my earth spacious? So we would have the right for civil disobedience. Alhamdulillah, it's not the case in America. America, of all Western countries, has the most robust protections for the First Amendment of freedom of religion. However, over time that could change, as of right now. Now, there are certain things that are illegal that we are not compelled to indulge in. And people have the right to practice those things, but it doesn't mean because it's legal that we are obligated to indulge in it. For instance, there's casinos not far away from here. It's haram to gamble. It's haram to work in a casino. Even though there are Muslims who gamble, there are Muslims who work in a casino. It's haram. Is anyone compelling us that we have to go get a job at a casino? Are we compelled to take our paychecks and go and gamble? Absolutely not. So we don't have to indulge in that. The third is civil laws that place a limitation on something that is allowable within Islam, but it's not wajib. In those, we must follow the law. That's the third. Best example I can give is ta'addud zawjat. Ta'addud zawjat. Polygyny. That's the best example I can give. Is it jaiz? Yes. Was it abrogated with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No. Sayyidina Bilal ibn Rabah radhiyallahu anhu had more than one wife. Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radhiyallahu anhu had more than one wife. Many of our ulama had more than one wife. Some of my teachers had more than one wife. Not here in America. Right? So it's illegal. Is it wajib for a man to have more than one wife? No. Even Imam Abu Hanifa said that it is wajib to be married, but that wajib is fulfilled with one wife. So isn't it an absolute right that a man is entitled to have more than one wife and that his religious rights are being denied if he can't have more than one wife registered? No, the men should follow that rule and that law of the state. Now, if someone wants to have 2 or 3 or 4 wives and just have an aqd nikah and don't register with the state of Michigan, that's his private business, right? It's only trying to register more than one marriage, right? It's odd in America for a man to have 3 or 4 mistresses, or sometimes these days women will have 2 or 3. I don't know what we call them, misters. That's normal in American society, right? But for us, we can't make that argument. That's like one. That's one particular. That's the best example I can. And I give another example. Not to offend anyone if this takes place in your culture. Most of the scholars from like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, Yemen, in the Shafi'iyya was Zaydiyya. They say that chewing qat, mish mushkila, mubah, no problem, you chew qat. Qat is scheduled as a narcotic in America. You can't say that your religious rights are being violated, or that you can just go and just chew some qat and it's all good. You shouldn't be chewing qat. And I know of a brother who was Somali who was here on a visa. He had a green card. He had caught with some qat. Qat is classified like in the same level of like cocaine. He committed a felony. Then his visa got revoked. He got deported away from his family back to Somalia. He came to my office at Care, Michigan, want some help. I'm sorry, Akhi, you broke the law. And like every time I like speak in South Dearborn, like at Masjid Dix, I tell the brothers, it's like, don't be coming to my office and talking about, oh yeah, well, you know, with the ulama said the American law doesn't care about the ulama, and we can't. I'm not going to defend you and say that's your religious right that you caught. It's not anything. It's not, and even that there's like ikhtilaf on that. Like a lot of scholars say it's haram. Like next door in Saudi Arabia, you'll get arrested if you get caught with qat. The ulama of Saudi Arabia says it's haram. Right, so that's another example, Ali, that we have to give. Right, we just can't. Generally speaking, America gives us the latitude to freely practice our deen. We should obey the laws of the land. But if it got to a point of any of our wajibat were being violated, we have the right to protest and to practice civil disobedience. And my subhanallah, I had to give him a call when we leave here. My grandfather's turned 98 years old today. He grew up in a time in America, grew up in the South, where he was denied Black people were denied basic human rights of healthcare and couldn't even go to hospitals, a white-only hospital. Right? It really wasn't that long in American society when it was like that. Right? You get denied medical care because of the color of your skin. Right? And I don't mean like subtle, what we said, like microaggressions, how we talk about race and day. I mean, when white folks were in rare form in America, back when there was lynchings and like legalized Jim Crow, unlike now when things are more subtle. Right? So I hope that answered your question. I gave a real long answer, but I thought that needed some clarification. Any other questions or comments? If not, we will conclude and we will come to chapter 2 next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, the obligation of social justice activism. And I'll define that term. I really don't like that term, but we'll define it and talk about it in the aspects of fardun ayn and fardun kifaya. Fardun ayn means individual obligation. Fardun ayn means individual obligation. Fardun kifaya means communal obligation. So this issue is an individual obligation at times, and we'll define that and give the proof from the Quran and Sunnah. And then Fardun kifaya, we will give the proof from the Quran and Sunnah to define this, because we should not be apathetic, right, when it comes to standing for our rights. With that, we will end. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka ونتوب إليك. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر إخوانا في غزة وفلسطين واليمن ولبنان وفي كل مكان يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أصلح أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. اللهم فرج إن أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم ارحم أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا دائما أبدا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم.